Testing. Ooh. Hi, everyone. There we go. Welcome to our session this afternoon. We have two divisions here today on behalf of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. My name is Mary Tess Johnson. I am an Environmental and Historic Preservation Advisor out of the Mitigation Division. I'll go ahead and pass it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves as well.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Smiley. I'm the Environment and Historic Preservation Branch Chief, new to FEMA, so give me some grace, please. I've been here for about 3 months, but it's nice to have friends that have seniority.
Hello, everyone. My name is Thomas Young. I'm with the Environmental Historic Preservation Branch, and I deal mostly with hazard mitigation programs, disaster, non-disaster, and also the tribal point of contact for mitigation.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christopher Pullman. I'm one of 6 tribal liaisons out of Region 9. Region 9 FEMA is in the same footprint as the EPA Region 9. So we work together often. So thanks.
What you'll find today as we do an overview is that FEMA interacts with the tribes in a couple of different capacities or approaches, not only direct nation-to-nation consultation, but also when every project that comes through, every grant program, we go through our EHP process and we do a consultation to ensure that there's no adverse effects for any of our funds that we execute throughout the region. Region 9 is broad. It does overlap with EPA's Region 9. That's Arizona, Nevada, California, Hawaii, and the territories. So it's I believe it's 157 tribes. It's within our footprint that we maintain relations with.
So what do we do? A lot of people know about FEMA when sometimes it's often too late, when a disaster has already been declared and when immediate needs have been identified. So we do more than just disaster response. We do a lot of education and preparedness. So part of Chris's team is about national preparedness. So establishing national exercises, holding trainings, collaboration across federal agencies. That way we can all operate under one incident command system. If and when a very large incident comes online, there's a framework already established that we can communicate and work together under. So we do much more than just disaster response. Education, preparation, planning for resilience is one big aspect that a lot of people don't know about. Next, we also deliver, implement, and serve communities, both disaster and non-disaster. So we'll talk a little bit about the disaster declaration process because that is an ever-increasing need as we face climate change and the ever-ending impacts of that. But there's also a non-disaster side that's really geared towards how to identify critical infrastructure gaps and go ahead and take a forward building approach. So Tom will talk a little bit later about non-disaster grant opportunities. And then lastly, we want to improve our process, procedure, and policy. So later in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about Sandy and Katrina and how that really changed how we operate as an agency and how we do things now post those events. So what are the type of disaster threats that FEMA supports? So some you're obviously really familiar about. Wildfire is one of the ever-growing threats throughout the state of California. One really recent impact that we weren't really used to was hurricanes out in California. Hurricane Hillary is a FEMA declared disaster event that we're currently supporting. COVID-19 also was a nationally declared disaster event for all of our state's interested tribes and nations as well. So that was something that we had never experienced before it happened. And so that was also a disaster that came online and part of our recovery profile recently as well. Some other examples, let's see, atmospheric river flooding was another recent trend. Earthquakes is another big impact in our region, among others. So before a disaster, actually I'm going to pass this over to Chris to talk about.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tess. One of the things that we do as tribal liaisons is that we're your first line to come to for just about anything. We want to be your voice, and we also want to make sure that we get you the right information. We are not experts in all of FEMA programs, but we know who to call and who to talk to. So that's where we really work. We also work closely with our tribal affairs group out of Washington, D.C., so we can get you that type of support if you need it. But that's one thing that's really important to know. But I would say the biggest thing that we do is that we provide training and education. And as tribal liaisons, we've been trained actually to deliver the Emergency Management Institute programs to tribes. There's a whole curriculum for tribes, and that's something that we're trained to be able to do. So if you do ask for training at your reservation or even around the reservation, we will be your instructors. So it makes it a lot better. So.
All right, thank you. So this is a little bit of my bread and butter. I work in disaster ops. So really quickly, because I know we don't have a ton of time and we want to save ample time for questions, I want to talk about the disaster declaration process. So in order for FEMA to come online, there has to be some type of incident that occurred. And the first step is for that incident period to happen. Next, there has to be a emergency request, emergency declaration that's submitted. Now that can come locally and submitted just within your community. It can also be statewide. It can impact multiple states. It depends on the type of event and the level of impact. The next step would be for a request for a major disaster declaration. And that is the step that requires signature from the president. And there is a damage assessment period when we're deciding on if a major disaster will be declared. We have entire teams dedicated to what we call preliminary damage assessments. They're field teams, and it's a joint effort. It's our representatives on behalf of FEMA, and then representatives on behalf of the community that's requesting assistance. So it could be the state, it could be the tribal nation, it could be a county, and sometimes, depending on the event, it could include all of them, all representatives at the same time. And so what we're doing is we're going out to those immediately impacted areas and assessing the damage and recording it, whether it's photographs, and trying to quantify an amount of damage and specify the type. So let's see, I'll talk about, I'll talk about the types of work that we do and the different types of programs. So two major programs that come online if a major disaster declaration is approved, meaning damage assessments have occurred and that damage threshold has met the indicator and the president has signed allowing us to come online and bring assets in. There are two types of assistant programs that can immediately be available. One is public assistance, and that's broken down by emergency work and permanent work. Emergency work can include your debris removal operations, so clearing your roads immediately to allow for evacuation, taking down hazardous trees immediately that are cause threat to public safety. And then emergency protective measures. So all of your police force, your fire, your forestry departments that are working endless overtime hours to keep things moving, to respond to this event. All of that type of activity can be reimbursed as well through FEMA. And then you have permanent work categories. I don't have a ton of time to talk about it, but roads, bridges, water treatment centers, let's see, utilities, parks. They're broken down into different categories of work to make it a little bit easier and to collect information and group projects by type. And then next, individual assistance. So these are your type of public-facing grant programs for housing. So it really doesn't matter the type of housing that's impacted. It could be mobile homes, it could be brick and mortar houses, individual households that were impacted. That could be crisis counseling, it could be food, immediate needs, like food, it could be sheltering programs. Individual households is under the I-8 program. All of those resources are available once a major disaster is declared. This is another graphic that talks more in detail about the two programs and the types of work. We have a ton of resources. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about it. All right, I'll pass it over to Tom to talk about after a disaster.
Thanks, Tess. Step away from the speaker. I work in the hazard mitigation grant, or the hazard mitigation assistance, and mainly I deal with hazard mitigation grant program. And so that is a program where applicants, sub-applicants can submit a project to FEMA, and that project can be repairing a road by improving, putting a new culvert in, rebuilding a bridge. So there are hazard mitigation grant projects that are tied to disasters. So those would, after the PA work is done or the IA work is done, these projects can prevent further damage to these facilities by getting like an engineered bridge or retrofitting a dam, things like that. So it's building up resiliency and preventing future damage from disasters. And so that is under the hazard mitigation grant program. And then under public assistance, PA mitigation, that is limited to eligible damaged areas. So those are, the same area that was hit by a hurricane. They could, rather than building the road how it was, they could rebuild the road, elevate it, something like that. So it's designed to withstand future damage from disasters. And environmental planning, historic preservation, or EHP, is it's the environmental compliance component of project reviews. All federally funded projects must undergo environmental review. Some reviews are quicker than others. You have work that has been determined through consultation with tribes and with the SHPO, that the work will not have any adverse effect on resources, archaeological, tribal, cultural resources. And so if those projects fit those definitions, we're able to complete the Section 106 NHPA review fairly quickly. And there's also a programmatic biological opinions that a project can fit under, or there's no effect determinations, and this is all under Endangered Species Act. And so projects like that can have a pretty quick review timeline. it just depends on the complexity of the project, the setting of the project, and a lot of other factors. If there's consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with Army Corps, with SHPO, TIPO, there's, depending on what level of consultation is needed with different agencies, that affects the timeline of the EHP review. And we're trying to assess we don't want to fund projects that are going to cause adverse effect to the community or to the environment. So that's the impetus behind the EHP review, is looking at a project that's in front of us and saying, this project, as it's scoped, is going to be beneficial to the community and to the environment. And we'll put conditions on the grant, get permitting from Army Corps for work and water, things like that, or tribal monitoring, or biological monitoring. Those are some typical conditions. Next slide. And so here's a graphic showing, this sort of illustrates wherever your project may be in this imaginary setting. Could be where some of these laws come into play. So the Dump Truck Clean Water Act, there's environmental justice for low-income minority populations, floodplains, communities in floodplains. There's invasive species. That's one that people might not think of, but a lot of projects that involve reseeding after wildfire, you have to make sure that the seed mix that they're using contains native seeds. And MBTA, that's Migratory Bird Treaty Act, that's between Mexico, United States, and Canada for bird species that migrate. And so there's limited work windows if those species are identified in the project area. And EHP, we highly value our partnership with tribes within our region. And if a tribe submitted if there was a emergency declaration or a disaster declaration from the tribe, then we would consult. If there's a TIPO appointed to the tribe, we would consult directly with them, and just take the considerations of the cultural resources when we're looking at the project reviews. And we will set up. We're always available for calls. The initial step that we take is to send out consultation letters, and then get the responses back. If a consultation is requested, we'll set up a meeting, in person or virtual. We'll do site inspections. That's all right. And we just want to make sure that we have a really good working relationship with FEMA and with tribes as far as protection of the resources and project review. And here's I was alluding to earlier, these are some of the typical timeframes for EHP review. Under NEPA, we have on the left side with StatX or CADXs. Those are, FEMA has their own set of CADXs for NEPA compliance. And so we review the project against that list. If it meets any of those, then it can be a CADX. If it doesn't, it may be an environmental assessment, or hardly ever happens, but EIS, yeah. And yeah, the EIS takes the longest time, and that's pretty rare. I think it's a couple cases we haven't had many EISs I know of yet. On the right side is for NHPA. We have programmatic allowances, which are outlined in the the, well, we have programmatic allowances that we can review a project against. If it fits those allowances, it's been determined from previous projects that these activities won't have any adverse effects. And then going down the list, consult with SHPO and TIPO. We have different determinations, and programmatic agreements may be needed for specific to a project if it's determined that there's going to be a lot of adverse impacts. And now I will pass it off to.
All right, so back to disaster operations. One of the biggest streamlining mechanisms that we identified as a result of Sandy and Katrina was that essentially double jeopardy was happening. We had multiple federal agencies that came online that were asking the same information over and over and over again, asking the same questions, and it became extremely exhausting and redundant to the process, to where it pretty much halted a lot of forthcoming, forward-thinking discussions and project development. So a mechanism was built called UFR, Unified Federal Review, and this essentially stems from an agreement that has over 15 or 16 federal agencies currently on it right now. We want to continue to build it out. So we want to get more people involved and online as the need elevates. This memorandum of understanding does include FEMA and EPA currently. One of the biggest challenges, if I'm honest, is that right now it's just headquarters representatives managing those agreements. And it's us in the field, in the communities that are impacted, that are implementing them. So we need feedback and collaboration and specific projects to implement these agreements to make them better. And so this graphic talks about how that MOU comes online. So right here, the advisor role is really a big point that I want to highlight, because as your community starts to recover, you're going to identify gaps. There's going to be funding opportunities that we say no to, that are deemed ineligible for whatever reason. It could be we say it's not from the disaster declaration. It was from a previous event a year ago, and you can't show us that it was from the disaster declaration. This UFR agreement allows other agencies to highlight that opportunity, that missed funding opportunity. And we can kind of punt the ball and say, what agencies can fill that gap? What kind of money and funding opportunities can fill that immediate need? Because it's identified as a need in this community, and it should not go unfulfilled. So UFR is a great process, but right now, it needs more advocates and it needs a voice. And the only way to really implement it properly is to identify those gaps, elevate them, and discuss them, and maintain these agreements, find opportunities to fold in more entities. One good example I could give you, out in the Pacific, we were working on a school, and one of the biggest challenges was that this school reconstruction really was much larger than repairing a school back to pre-disaster condition. And that's really under the public assistance program. Our goal is to build things back to where you were pre-disaster. They wanted to redesign a whole new campus. So a little bit outside of our scope. What we ended up doing is phasing approach. So we ended up funding initial design studies only. That's what we paid for. And another agency came in and funded the actual reconstruction. That is a beautiful opportunity for UFR. Finding a problem, leveraging those relationships to fix it. All right.
I'll just move us along a little quicker here. We've got this entire presentation is going to be available to you. So don't worry about taking too many notes. This is all going to, because it's full of a lot of detail. And obviously, if you're a note taker like I am, the next slide goes before I've finished taking my notes. So that's why, just remember to know that you're going to get this. The biggest thing that we do is, as tribal liaisons, is just make sure that we are constantly advocating for the tribes. So one of the two things that we did, we talked about Pacific public assistance, one of the programs. One thing we were able to do is that we finally are able to help repair BIA roads. That just happened this year. And we're also able to work on if there's cultural or sensitive areas and that you really don't want anybody but tribal members there. FEMA's made a provision so that we don't need to inspect it. So that's one of the two big things that we happened just this year. So I just wanted to let you know too that our entire team is going to be at National Congress of American Indians next week. So if you need me to take anything there, let me know. Talk about partnerships, and this is the partial rest of the team there. The one that's looking over Pamela Jo's shoulder there is Crystal Harjo. She now works for BIA. So it's really, BIA's very lucky to have her. And we miss her every day. But anyway, it does make us that much more easier for us though to work with BIA because we have somebody there that we know and trust. So it's great to do that. But that's, next slide, please. And this is our national tribal strategy. This was put into place. This is the very first tribal strategy that FEMA has ever had. And you can read that online too. Next slide. And then one of the biggest things that I work in national preparedness, that's where I live. And so practicing preparedness is something that we are constantly pushing. And if there's any way we can ever help you with that. One of the big things that many tribal nations have found helpful is to start their own CERT program. And if you don't know what that is, I'll be glad to fill you in on it. But here you go. I'm going to pass it back to.
All right, that wraps up our presentation. We want to make time for questions because that was a lot of material. So we'll go ahead and pause for questions. Thank you.
There was a question online.
Sure.
Someone asked, what is the turnaround time for assistance once a declaration has been listed?
That's a great question. So we're going to go back to.
Here, Jess.
Nice. Yes, we're going to go back to this slide about FEMA declarations. So this timeline here in between an emergency declaration and a major disaster declaration. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the time frame is actually you have 60 days, 30 days from the event and 60 days to submit your formal request. You can become eligible for an extension, but you have to ask and submit that in writing. That's a great question. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned Katrina, which is ancient history for some people in the room. Okay, you mentioned Katrina, ancient history for some. Sandy, which is, we'll call it medieval. And currently we have evil, which Helene. What have we learned? What would you say is the big difference that those people, and keep in mind that a lot of the tribal communities are rural, kind of, and I'll use a little, like East Palestine was rural. So what did we learn?
Yeah, so I'll speak to disaster ops and then I'll ask Chris to chime in too. So one of the biggest lessons learned, I think, was engagement. We were really making decisions as a federal agency and not engaging local entities. So that's been a huge change. If we're comparing our disaster operations from Katrina to our most recent declarations with tribal nations coming in as direct recipients for funding, so not through the state, not through a county, but directly, we now embed tribal environmental departments, tribal forestry departments, TIPOs, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, in our incident command operations. So they record the same type of information that we're collecting, and they provide that feedback directly. That way those decisions are being made for their community, and they have an opportunity to truly voice them in lifetime.
My concern would be that while you may have shortened the distance between, let's say, a tribal community and FEMA, it looks like there's more agencies involved in the soup, and that concerns me.
No, that's a valid point. BIA, BLM, EPA, FEMA, these are all entities that come into play when a disaster declaration comes online. And that can muddy the waters, it can. But we did talk about some streamlining mechanisms that we're trying to establish that force those agencies to come together to talk, to hopefully share data, resources, and reduce the redundancy.
Yeah, maybe I'm probably the only one standing up here that remembers when the Sandy Improvement Act went into effect in 2013 and signed by President Obama. But basically what happened is that tribes never had the opportunity to go direct to FEMA for help. And that's what changed when that went into effect. And now we're in the middle of making some major changes to that program. I can't really announce what they are yet, but we've been working on them for close to 5 years. And it looks like we're really close to being able to share that with the tribal nations. But I'd say that's probably the biggest thing that's changed. And also going back to our tribal strategy where we never had one before, that's gone into place. That's a big change. So tribes are being included rather than just putting them in the same category as the state that you reside in. We take the term tribal nations very seriously, and we have a great, for the first time also, FEMA has a tribal advocate that reports directly to the FEMA director, and her name is Kelby Kennedy, and she's just terrific. So there's been a lot of changes since that time, and I think they've all been positive. So.
Great. One of the earlier slides had information on the National Flood Insurance Program. I was just curious, in light of private insurance companies dropping a lot of homes from wildfire or fire insurance, have there been any conversations within FEMA about perhaps creating a program for wildfires that parallels this NFIP program for floods, like to essentially provide national wildfire protection insurance?
We actually have a branch out of the mitigation division, risk analysis branch, that does put together mapping resources that can distribute this need. Usually it's tied to a specific disaster event. I'm not aware of any national resources currently.
Cool. Thank you.
And just to clarify, you were asking if there was anything in the works like NFIP for flood insurance for fire.
Yeah. I just know a lot of homes across the state are being dropped from wildfire insurance in areas you wouldn't even expect, and it's becoming a huge concern for, I live in California, so I'll just speak as a California resident. And I just feel like something like this would be really beneficial.
It's a good question. I have not heard that, but
Okay.
Flood hazards post-wildfire, right?
Or just wildfire hazards in general.
wildfire
So many
insurance.
people are buying homes for,
A lot of California are just losing insurance, like,
It just
they won't provide it to new homeowners, and all State Farm have left the state for home insurance. So I think their concern is just in general, on that aspect. I mean, there's not, and there truly right now, there's no other options. There's no new insurances coming into the state, and a lot of them are also planning on leaving or excluding new homeowners from their insurances. So, and I mean, in California, when we're not on fire, we're flooding, right? So that's a concern kind of just in general. I guess that's kind of.
It's a good question. I've not, but I'll follow up with it. Thank you.
I don't know if I really need this, but me and Jennifer here, we're with the USDA, and just to kind of put into perspective how we work together with FEMA, not trying to steal any of their thunder, but we work with rural development. So this approach. We actually did use it recently for a lot of the disasters in California, where we are using FEMA funds as our match requirement, which is actually one of the first times ever we've been able to use federal funds as match with federal funds, which basically means the applicant would pay zero as the grant money they're matching is from FEMA, and then they're getting grant money from USDA Rural Development. So I would also kind of give people hope in that aspect where, look, we're all trying to help you guys as best as possible. And it does sound like it muddies the waters when you're working with multiple agencies. But I guess the basis of it all is that, we're here to help you guys. And let's say FEMA can't cover it and they can't provide match. Well, we probably can cover it. And every federal agency has different regulations that allow them to change their scope and fix your problem somehow, some way. So I would just kind of clarify that, like, we're here to help you. We're not trying to make the waters muddy or make it harder for you to get funding. We're trying to, as well as, with FEMA, trying to make sure you guys can get all the help that's possible. And I think that's a huge step forward with that, with our most recently, it's called, for the USDA, was called 2022 fiscal year disasters, which included 8 or 9 disasters that were declared in 2022, which was atmospheric rivers, the snow, the fires. It was a whole bunch of different ones that we were able to do, major impact solutions with the help of FEMA money and USDA money, which, as I said, is the first time ever. So just a shout out to that, resiliency kind of aspect.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any more questions? Come on, don't be shy. Yeah, go ahead.
Slightly off topic. Any idea when they're going to release this? I mean, I know when the dates are for Tribal Training Week. Any idea when they're going to open that up? It hasn't opened up yet. Usually it's open by now.
Yeah, one of the big things that I just read something from EMI and Emergency Management Institute. We have every year we have Tribal Training Week, which is in Anniston, Alabama, and last year was probably the best ever. We had about 320 tribal citizens there. But right now, the reason that they're holding it back is because they're using a lot of those people that are working in that area to respond to disasters right now. We've basically pulled out all the stops from everybody. And if a trainer isn't training, then he's going to be on the call taking registrations from people. Where we just, I think the last thing I heard was that we just took 250,000 registrations for FEMA assistance throughout the states that were affected by the last 2 hurricanes. But one thing I'll just say a little bit about fire, this is something that we've been working on for a long time, is that we want to be able to let tribal fire departments go directly to FEMA to get FMAGs or fire assistant grants. And it looks like that's made it through Congress, and we're just waiting to be able to say that we can do that. But that's a big plus there too. And also, because you are from California, right over there is your tribal liaison from the state of California. Don't look over your shoulder there, Alex. But you may want to talk to him, and maybe there's some state programs that might be able to help you too. So I never speak for the state, but I can tell you who you can talk to.
So I had a question regarding long-term funding. So say like scenario like post-Katrina, you had put people in FEMA trailers. Are there any funding opportunities for rebuilding of facilities and houses after you put people up into FEMA trailers?
Yeah, so this is going to fall typically under our individual assistance program that I briefly talked about. Individuals and households program. So it depends on the type of incident and the impacts. So one best example is if we're talking mass devastation. So no homes, no suitable homes, no resources available to rent, so no rental assistance, no properties in an immediate area to lease, right? There is certain permanent construction programs, so PHC, permanent housing construction, and that is under individual assistance where we do construct homes permanently. And we did conclude one major operation out of Northern Mariana Islands where we built over 300 homes out there. So that is eligible under these individual assistance program.
The other thing we did where there was a actual, a tribe had been building homes and then they had a major flood. And so there was a lot of damage to the homes, especially to the roads and everything else like that. We were able to come in and repair the roads, repair the facility. And I just went to the ribbon cutting 2 months ago. So it can happen. But like I said, it's not always. We're also exploring working more closely with HUD, and that's something that we've been discussing for probably the last 2 years. But it's making it there. But you know, it's like sometimes the federal government can be slower than we would like.
Hi, I'm Megan. I work for the Pechanga Band of Indians in Southern California. And I have a question. Do you guys have the qualifications for like a CADX or an environmental assessment or EIS on your website somewhere? Or how would we identify what qualifies and what does not?
We don't have it on our website. You're looking at 3 representatives that can provide that information to you, though. We have a list. It's agency specific of what the type of activities that we consider to be statutorily excluded and categorically excluded. And then in order to we also have a programmatic environmental assessment that includes the state of California, Arizona, and Nevada. So it doesn't include the Pacific Islands currently. So that is also another streamlining mechanism for a project that maybe triggers a threshold beyond a CADX. Right now, the threshold is usually by the size. So 0.5 acres or more of an impact usually is outside of our CADXs. But we can definitely provide that to you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from EPA, but I do work with a tribe that has inherited some FEMA trailers post Hurricane Katrina that have since fallen into disarray. And so, yeah, I was just wondering, is there some sort of system or process to like properly dispose of these? Because there's like mold and like a lot of like broken glass and stuff. Is there like somewhere at FEMA, or do you know anyone to properly, dispose of these trailers?
Usually those trailers are sold by GSA. So by then, ownership of the trailers have passed from FEMA, even though they are originally FEMA trailers. So unfortunately, we don't have a way of getting rid of it after that. But that's how they're usually sold through GSA, like excess materials that owned by the government. So we don't really have a responsibility after that. But so I've never heard of anything that is available, unfortunately, as far as funding from FEMA. But
is that what you're asking for, is funding, or were you for like procedures or disposition criteria?
Really just any, if you all knew of any way to kind of get rid of those on the property. So, but no, but thank you for letting me know.
Any other questions?
If there's no more questions, thank you all for your time. I want to thank Tess and Tom and Chris. I will say, if you do have any more questions, Chris is going to be here for the next couple of days. You'll see him. If you need any, reach out to any one of us, and you can pass my contact information along as needed. And then thank you so much for your time.